The forest was alive with shadows, its silence broken only by the occasional snap of twigs underfoot. Moonlight filtered through the dense canopy above, casting fractured beams that danced across the forest floor like restless spirits. Kael moved swiftly, his every step deliberate and soundless. His amber eyes glowed faintly in the darkness, scanning for movement, his senses sharp as a blade's edge. Behind him, the shadow pack followed, loyal but wary, their forms shifting uneasily between man and beast. Kael's jaw tightened as he caught the scent of blood on the wind. Not his own, but fresh enough to make his instincts flare. Another skirmish had broken out at the borderlands, likely orchestrated by Darius, that treacherous snake who called himself an alpha. The thought made Kael's lip curl into a snarl. This wasn't just about territory anymore, it was personal. Every attack, every ambush, it was all part of Darius' game to weaken him, to take what little remained of the shadow pack's dwindling pride. He signaled for his pack to hold back, raising a hand without looking over his shoulder. They obeyed instantly, melting into the trees like ghosts. Kael didn't need them tonight. He'd deal with this himself. The clearing ahead reeked of death. Blood pooled beneath mangled bodies, his wolves. Their lifeless eyes stared up at the sky, accusing him even in death. Kael's chest tightened, though his face betrayed nothing. He crouched beside one of the fallen, brushing dirt from the silver pendant around the wolf's neck, a symbol of loyalty to the pack. Guilt gnawed at him, a relentless predator he could never outrun. These deaths were on his hands. If he hadn't been so focused on revenge, maybe they'd still be alive. A twig snapped behind him. Kael spun, claws erupting from his fingertips as adrenaline surged through his veins. Too late, he saw the flash of steel before the first blade struck. Silver seared through his flesh, slicing deep into his side. Pain exploded, white-hot and blinding, but Kael refused to falter. With a roar, he lunged forward, tearing through two attackers before more descended upon him. Darius' laughter echoed through the night, cold and mocking. "You're slipping, Kael," came the voice, low and venomous. "How long do you think you can keep protecting scraps of land when your own pack is falling apart?" Kael bared his teeth, ignoring the agony radiating from his wounds. He fought with ferocity born of desperation, shredding flesh and snapping bones. But there were too many of them. One by one, they wore him down until a final blow sent him crashing to the ground. His vision blurred as silver poisoning spread through his system, sapping his strength. Through the haze, he caught a glimpse of Darius stepping into view, his icy blue eyes gleaming with triumph. "Consider this a message," Darius said, his voice dripping with malice. "Stay out of my way, or next time I won't stop until there's nothing left of you." And then everything went black. When Kael came to, the world was spinning. The metallic tang of blood filled his mouth, and every breath felt like fire in his lungs. He staggered upright, clutching his side, where the silver wound throbbed with a dull, persistent ache. The forest was eerily quiet now, save for the distant hoot of an owl. No sign of Darius or his pack, just him and the endless stretch of wilderness. Each step was torture, pain radiating outward with every movement. Yet Kael pressed on, driven by sheer willpower. He couldn't afford weakness, not now, not ever. Not after everything he'd lost. The guilt clawed at him again, sharper than the physical pain. How many more would die because of his failures? His thoughts were interrupted by the soft crunch of leaves nearby. Instinctively he tensed, ready to strike, but froze when he saw her. She stood at the edge of a small clearing, framed by moonlight. Human, fragile. Her wide hazel eyes locked onto him, and for a moment neither of them moved. She clutched a lantern in trembling hands, its flickering light casting shadows across her delicate features. Fear radiated off her in waves, but she didn't run. Instead, she took a hesitant step forward. Are you hurt?" Her voice was barely above a whisper, laced with uncertainty. Kael wanted to growl, to warn her away, but the words caught in his throat. His body swayed, the effort of standing becoming too much. Before he could react, his knees buckled, and he collapsed onto the damp earth. Elara hesitated, staring down at the wounded stranger sprawled before her. He was enormous, his frame muscular and imposing even in his weakened state. Dark hair fell messily over his forehead, partially obscuring the sharp angles of his face. Blood soaked through his torn shirt, staining the ground beneath him. And yet, despite his injuries, there was something undeniably dangerous about him, something primal. Her mind screamed at her to leave, to turn and run as fast as she could. But something else held her rooted to the spot. Maybe it was the vulnerability etched into his unconscious expression, or maybe it was the strange pull she felt toward him, like an invisible thread tugging at her heart. Whatever it was, it silenced her fear just long enough for her to kneel beside him. What if he woke up angry? What if he attacked her? The questions raced through her mind, but she pushed them aside. For reasons she couldn't explain, she couldn't abandon him here. Not like this. With a deep breath, Elara hooked her arms under his shoulders and began dragging him toward her cabin. It was slow going, his weight was nearly unbearable, and her muscles burned with the effort, but she didn't stop. As she struggled, she couldn't shake the feeling that bringing him inside might change everything. Back at the cabin, Elara laid him gently on the floor, her pulse racing as she debated her next move. Should she tend to his wounds? Or should she bolt the door and hope he didn't wake up? Either way, one thing was certain. When he opened his eyes, nothing would be the same for either of them. The cabin was small but cozy, its wooden walls lined with shelves crammed full of books. A single lantern sat on the table, casting flickering shadows across the worn rug where Kael lay unconscious. Elara knelt beside him, her hands trembling as she pressed a damp cloth to his side. The wound was deep, jagged, and glistened unnaturally in the dim light, a sure sign it wasn't caused by an ordinary weapon. Her stomach churned at the sight of so much blood. She'd never tended to anyone this badly injured before, let alone someone who could wake up and rip her throat out without a second thought. But she couldn't just leave him there in the woods. Something inside her, some instinct she didn't fully understand, had compelled her to act. As she worked, her fingers brushed against his skin, and she froze. Strange symbols etched into his flesh caught her eye, glowing faintly under the moonlight streaming through the window. They pulsed like living things, shifting slightly beneath her touch. Her breath hitched. This man wasn't normal. Whatever he wasn't human. Elara pulled her hand back quickly, heart pounding. What had she gotten herself into? She glanced toward the door, half expecting him to leap up any moment and attack her. But instead he remained still, his chest rising and falling steadily, if unevenly, as though even his body resisted surrendering to weakness. Kael woke suddenly, his eyes snapping open, like twin flames igniting in the dark. For a moment, he simply stared at the ceiling, disoriented. Then reality crashed down on him all at once, the pain radiating from his wounds, the unfamiliar scent of lavender filling the air, and the soft rustling of fabric nearby. He turned his head sharply, amber eyes locking onto Elara. She flinched, clutching the cloth tighter in her hands, as if it might protect her. Up close, he seemed even larger than she'd realized, his presence overwhelming despite his injuries. His gaze swept over her, sharp and assessing, before settling on the makeshift bandages wrapped around his torso. "What did you do?" His voice was low, gravelly, and laced with barely contained fury. "Who are you?" Elara swallowed hard, forcing herself to meet his stare. I found you in the woods. You were hurt." I don't need your help, he growled, sitting up abruptly despite the fresh wave of pain that shot through him. He winced but refused to show weakness. Not here, not now. Not in front of her. Well, clearly you did, she shot back, surprising even herself with the edge in her tone. You wouldn't have lasted much longer out there. Kael's jaw tightened, his nostrils flaring as he fought the urge to lash out. Humans were weak, fragile creatures. They didn't understand strength or survival. Yet something about her defiance sparked a flicker of curiosity within him, a dangerous distraction he couldn't afford. Before he could respond, a strange sensation washed over him, like icy tendrils wrapping around his mind. An ancient voice whispered words he couldn't ignore. Bound by blood, bound by fate. Her life is yours. Your strength is hers. His eyes widened, and he grabbed Elara's wrist reflexively, pulling her closer. She gasped, startled, but didn't pull away. What did you do to me? He demanded, his grip tightening. I didn't do anything, she protested, trying and failing to wrench free. I don't know what's going on. But deep down, Kael knew the truth. The bond humming between them was undeniable, primal. Somehow, saving him had tied their fates together. If she died, so would he, not just physically, but mentally, spiritually. The realization filled him with rage. He didn't want this connection, didn't need it. And yet he couldn't deny the inexplicable draw he felt toward her, like gravity pulling two stars together. Outside, the forest stirred. Shadows moved among the trees, silent but deliberate. Darius' scouts had picked up Kael's trail, following the scent of blood straight to Elara's cabin. Their yellow eyes glinted in the darkness as they circled the property, waiting for their master's command. Inside, Kael's heightened senses detected their presence immediately. His muscles tensed, ready to spring into action, but he forced himself to stay calm for now. He released Elara's wrist and stood shakily, every movement sending waves of agony through his body. Silver poisoning still coursed through his veins, weakening him far more than he cared to admit. We need to leave, he said curtly, scanning the room for anything useful. There wasn't much, a knife on the counter, a few blankets, but it would have to do. Leave, Elara repeated incredulously. You're in no condition to go anywhere. Look at you, you can barely stand. And staying here will get us both killed, Kael snapped, rounding on her. Do you think I came by these wounds accidentally? Someone's after me, and they'll come for you too if we don't move. Elara took a step back, her mind racing. Everything about this situation screamed danger, yet she couldn't shake the feeling that abandoning him would be worse. Fine, she said finally, crossing her arms. But you're not leaving until those wounds are treated properly. Kael opened his mouth to argue, then hesitated. Arguing would waste time he didn't have, and the truth was he needed her for now. Reluctantly, he nodded. Make it quick. Elara rummaged through a nearby drawer, pulling out a needle and thread. This is going to hurt, she warned, holding up the tools. Kael smirked faintly, though there was no humor in it. Pain doesn't scare me. She frowned, meeting his gaze briefly before focusing on the task at hand. As she worked, stitching the gash in his side with steady hands, neither spoke. The tension between them was palpable, thick enough to choke on. Yet beneath the surface, something else simmered, an unspoken understanding, fragile but undeniable. When she finished, Kael exhaled sharply and stood, testing his weight. He still looked pale, his usual commanding presence dulled by injury and exhaustion. But determination burned in his eyes, fierce and unyielding. Grab whatever supplies you can carry, he ordered. We're leaving. Elara hesitated, glancing toward the window. Beyond the glass, shapes moved in the shadows, circling the cabin like predators, closing in on prey. Fear prickled along her spine, but she forced herself to nod. All right, but you owe me an explanation. Kael didn't respond. Instead, he moved to the door, peering outside cautiously. The wolves were closing in, their growls low and menacing. He cursed under his breath, gripping the knife tightly in one hand. "They're already here," he muttered, turning back to Elara. "Stay behind me and do exactly as I say." Elara swallowed hard, clutching a bag of supplies to her chest. Whatever happened next, she knew one thing for certain. Her quiet, predictable life was over. As Kael stepped outside, the first wolf lunged, teeth bared. Elara screamed, but Kael shoved her back into the cabin, slamming the door shut behind him. Alone in the dim light, she pressed her ear to the wood, listening to the sounds of snarls and scuffles beyond. Was he strong enough to fight them off? Or would they both end up dead tonight? The cabin was quiet, save for the faint crackle of the fire in the hearth. Kael leaned against the wall near the window, his amber eyes scanning the darkness beyond the glass. His body ached with every breath, but he refused to show it, not to her. Elara sat on the edge of the bed, clutching a blanket around her shoulders as though it could shield her from the tension that filled the room. "You should leave," Kael said abruptly, his voice cutting through the silence like a blade. "If they find you here, they'll kill you." Elara looked up sharply, her hazel eyes narrowing. "And what about you? You're in no shape to fight anyone off right now." "I don't need your help," he growled, turning away from her gaze. The words felt hollow even as he spoke them. He knew she was right. His strength wasn't fully restored, and Darius wolves were still out there, lurking just beyond the tree line. But pride and fear kept him from admitting it. "Then why haven't you left yet?" Elara challenged, standing now. Her voice trembled slightly, but there was steel beneath the surface. She'd already risked too much for him. She wasn't about to back down now. "You're not exactly subtle, you know. If someone's after you, staying here puts both of us in danger." Kael clenched his jaw, his fingers tightening around the knife he held. He wanted to argue, to tell her she had no idea what she was talking about. But the truth was he needed time to heal, and whether he liked it or not, she was all he had right now. "Fine," he muttered finally, his tone clipped. "But if you stay, you follow my rules. No questions, no arguments." Elara crossed her arms, glaring at him. "I'm not some submissive puppy, Kael. I saved your life, remember?" His lips curled into a snarl at the jab, but before he could respond, a sharp knock echoed through the cabin. Both froze, their gazes snapping toward the door. Outside, the sound of footsteps grew louder, deliberate and heavy. "They're here," Kael whispered, moving swiftly to block Elara from view. His movements were stiff, betraying the lingering pain in his side, but his expression hardened into something primal. "Stay behind me." Elara's heart raced as she watched Kael position himself between her and the door. For all his abrasiveness, there was no denying the protective stance he took, or the fact that he was willing to face whatever came next despite his injuries. Still, fear clawed at her chest as the doorknob rattled ominously. The first wolf lunged through the doorway, its teeth bared and eyes glowing yellow in the dim light. Kael reacted instantly, driving the knife into its throat with brutal precision. The creature let out a strangled yelp before collapsing onto the floor, blood pooling beneath it. Another followed, this one larger and more aggressive. It swiped at Kael, forcing him to stagger backward. Pain shot through his torso, and for a moment, panic flickered in his eyes. He couldn't keep this up alone. Elara grabbed the nearest object, a cast-iron skillet hanging by the fireplace, and swung it with surprising force. The impact sent the second wolf reeling, giving Kael enough time to regain his footing. Together, they fought side by side, their movements chaotic but effective. By the time the third attacker retreated into the shadows, the cabin was a mess of overturned furniture and streaks of blood. Panting, Kael turned to Elara, his expression unreadable. "You didn't have to do that," he said gruffly, though there was an undercurrent of gratitude in his tone. "Yes, I did," she replied firmly, lowering the skillet. Her hands shook, but her resolve didn't waver. We're stuck together, whether you like it or not. For a moment, Kael almost smiled, but then reality crashed back down on him. One of the wolves had escaped, disappearing into the night, and once it reported back to Darius, there would be no hiding anymore. Later that night, Elara lay awake on the couch, staring at the ceiling. Sleep eluded her, haunted by vivid dreams of wolves howling under a blood-red moon. Shadowy figures whispered secrets in languages she didn't understand, their voices echoing in her mind long after she woke with a start. She sat up, rubbing her temples as fragments of the dream lingered. Wolves, symbols glowing faintly on skin, and a voice, deep and ancient, calling her name. It wasn't just Kael who was tied to this curse. She could feel it in her bones. Her thoughts were interrupted by the soft creak of the floorboards. Turning her head, she saw Kael standing near the window, his silhouette illuminated by the moonlight. He looked lost in thought, his usual intensity softened by exhaustion. "What are you doing?" she asked quietly, pulling the blanket tighter around herself. "Keeping watch," he replied without looking at her. "They'll be back." Elara hesitated, then stood and joined him. "Do you think they'll hurt anyone else because of us?" Kael glanced at her, surprised by the concern in her voice. "Probably," he admitted grimly. "Darius doesn't care who gets caught in the crossfire." "That's not fair," she murmured, her fists clenching at her sides. "People shouldn't suffer because of our whatever this is." "Our bond," Kael corrected, his tone bitter. "An ancient curse neither of us asked for." Elara frowned, studying him. Beneath the anger and frustration, she caught glimpses of guilt and regret, emotions he tried so hard to bury. Despite everything, she found herself wanting to understand him, to peel back the layers of his defenses. "Why does it feel like we've been connected before?" she asked suddenly, voicing the question that had been gnawing at her since the attack. "Like I've seen those symbols somewhere." Kael stiffened, his gaze darting to hers. "Don't go digging into things you don't understand," he warned, his voice low and dangerous. "Some truths are better left buried." Before she could press further, a distant howl pierced the night. Kael tensed, his hand instinctively reaching for the knife at his side. Another scout, and likely not alone. "We need to move," he said urgently, already heading for the door. "Now." "But where will we go?" Elara demanded, scrambling after him. "We can't keep running forever." Kael paused, glancing over his shoulder. For the first time, she saw uncertainty in his eyes, a crack in his otherwise impenetrable facade. "Somewhere safe," he said finally, "if such a place exists." As they stepped outside, the scent of blood and fur filled the air. Movement rustled in the trees, and glowing eyes emerged from the shadows. Then came the unmistakable sound of boots crunching leaves. Too many to count. Darius had arrived personally this time, flanked by his pack. "Well, well," Darius drawled, stepping into view. His icy blue eyes gleamed with malice as they landed on Elara. "Looks like the infamous Kael has gone soft. Who's this little human pet of yours?" Kael pushed Elara behind him, his posture defensive and ready to strike. But even he knew they were outnumbered and outmatched. What would happen next? The forest was eerily silent as Kael and Elara fled deeper into the wilderness, their footsteps muffled by damp leaves and moss. Behind them, the distant howls of Darius' pack echoed like a haunting melody, growing fainter with each passing mile, but neither dared to slow down. Kael led the way, his movements stiff but determined despite his lingering injuries. Elara followed close behind, her breath shallow and uneven, clutching the strap of the bag slung over her shoulder. Finally, they reached an abandoned cabin tucked far from any trails or roads, a relic of some long-forgotten hunter who'd once sought refuge in these woods. It wasn't much, but it would have to do for now. Kael pushed open the creaking door, scanning the interior before nodding for Elara to enter. She stepped inside cautiously, her eyes adjusting to the dim light filtering through cracked shutters. Dust coated every surface and cobwebs hung like tattered curtains from the corners of the room. Yet something about the place felt familiar, though she couldn't quite place why. "We'll stay here until nightfall," Kael said gruffly, leaning heavily against the wall. His amber eyes scanned the shadows outside one last time before he closed the door, sealing them off from the world. Elara set the bag down on a rickety table, her mind racing. They were running out of options and time. Every moment they spent hiding only delayed the inevitable confrontation with Darius. But what choice did they have? She glanced at Kael, noting the tension etched into his features. He looked exhausted, his usual commanding presence dulled by pain and uncertainty. "I need answers," she said, suddenly breaking the silence. Her voice was firm, leaving no room for argument. "About the curse. About us." Kael's jaw tightened, and he turned away, avoiding her gaze. "You're safer not knowing." "Safer?" Elara snapped, stepping closer. "I'm already caught up in this mess because of you. You owe me the truth." For a moment, Kael didn't respond. Then, with a heavy sigh, he nodded toward the attic hatch above them. "Look around if you want. Maybe you'll find something useful." Elara climbed the ladder to the attic, her heart pounding as she pushed aside boxes and crates cluttered with decades of forgotten belongings. Amidst the chaos, she found a small wooden chest bound with iron hinges. Inside were old journals, their pages brittle and yellowed with age. As she flipped through them, her stomach churned. The entries spoke of her ancestors, hunters who had fought alongside werewolves centuries ago to seal away a malevolent force known as the Forgotten Ones. According to the journals, these spirits were ancient beings born of chaos and destruction, capable of corrupting both man and beast. Her family had played a crucial role in imprisoning them, using rituals and sacrifices that blurred the line between life and death. But one passage stopped her cold. Should the bond between human and wolf be broken, the Forgotten Ones shall rise again, consuming all in their path. Her hands trembled as she read the words over and over, dread pooling in her chest. This wasn't just about Kael or Darius, it was bigger than either of them. And somehow she was tied to it all. Downstairs, Kael was experiencing his own revelations. A vision struck him without warning, pulling him into a dreamscape filled with shadowy figures and glowing symbols. An ancient voice whispered in his mind, recounting fragments of a prophecy. When moonlight binds flesh and fate, two souls divided shall unite. Through blood and fire, the Forgotten Ones shall fall or rise anew. He stumbled back against the wall, clutching his head as the images faded. The connection between him and Elara wasn't random. It was destiny. Their bond was meant to stop the Forgotten Ones, but succeeding would require sacrifices neither of them might be willing to make. By the time Elara descended from the attic, her face pale and drawn, Kael had already pieced together enough to know they were in deeper trouble than he'd realized. When she handed him the journal, their fingers brushed briefly, sending a jolt of electricity through both of them. Neither acknowledged it, though the tension between them thickened. "This is my fault," Elara murmured, her voice barely audible. "My family started this. If we hadn't sealed them away—" "It's not your fault," Kael interrupted sharply, though there was no venom in his tone. "What's done is done. We can't change the past, we can only deal with what's ahead." Elara shook her head, tears welling in her eyes. "And what happens when dealing with it gets US killed?" Before Kael could respond, a sharp knock echoed through the cabin. Both froze, their gazes snapping toward the door. Outside, the sound of boots crunching gravel signaled someone approaching. Someone human. Victor Cross stood on the porch, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit that seemed utterly out of place in the rugged wilderness. His gray eyes gleamed with calculated curiosity as he adjusted his glasses and smiled thinly. "Miss Hayes," he began, his voice smooth and polished, "I've been looking for you." Elara hesitated, glancing at Kael, who moved instinctively to block her from view. Victor's gaze flickered to him briefly before returning to her. "You've been seen associating with unusual individuals," Victor continued, his smile widening slightly. "I'm here to help. Whatever he's told you, whatever lies he's spun, it's not safe for you to trust him." Elara's heart raced as she processed his words. Help? From a stranger who clearly knew more than he let on? She looked to Kael, searching for reassurance, but his expression was unreadable, a mask of anger and caution. "What do you know about him?" Victor pressed, taking a step closer. "Do you even know what he is?" Elara swallowed hard, torn between fear and doubt. Everything about this man screamed danger, yet his words planted seeds of uncertainty in her mind. Could she really trust Kael? Or was Victor right? As Victor reached into his coat pocket, Kael growled low in his throat, his body tensing like a coiled spring. Whatever Victor intended to reveal next, it was clear he wasn't leaving without a fight. But before anyone could act, the sound of howling erupted in the distance, closer than ever before. Darius' pack had found them. Caught between Victor's probing questions and the imminent threat of attack, Elara faced an impossible choice. Side with the mysterious hunter or stand by the man who dragged her into this nightmare. Either way, betrayal loomed on the horizon. The cabin was quiet, save for the faint crackle of the fire in the hearth. Outside, the forest seemed eerily still, as though holding its breath before the storm. Kael paced near the window, his amber eyes scanning the darkness beyond the glass. Every instinct screamed at him that they were being watched, hunted. He clenched and unclenched his fists, frustration simmering beneath the surface. Elara sat on the edge of a chair, her hands gripping the arms tightly. She hadn't spoken much since Victor's visit, her mind replaying his words over and over. "Do you even know what he is?" The question gnawed at her, planting seeds of doubt she couldn't ignore. But every time she looked at Kael, the way he stood between her and danger, the way his jaw tightened when he thought she wasn't looking, it became harder to believe he was anything but protective. Still, the tension between them was palpable, thick enough to choke on. "We need to move," Kael said abruptly, breaking the silence. His voice was low but urgent, his gaze never leaving the window. "They're closing in." Elara frowned, standing quickly. "What do you mean?" "I mean Darius isn't playing games anymore. He knows where we are, or at least he will soon." Kael turned to face her, his expression grim. "Staying here is suicide, and running isn't." Elara shot back, crossing her arms. "We can't keep doing this forever, Kael. Sooner or later, we'll run out of places to hide." Kael's eyes narrowed, his patience wearing thin. "You think I don't know that? This isn't about hiding. It's about surviving long enough to figure out how to stop him." "Stop him?" Elara repeated incredulously. "How? By relying on some prophecy neither of us understands? Or maybe you're hoping my so-called powers will magically save us all?" Her words hung in the air, sharp and biting. Kael stiffened, his gaze hardening. "If you'd rather leave, go ahead. No one's stopping you." Elara hesitated, anger flaring in her chest. "Why do you even care? Why haven't you just left me behind already?" For a moment, Kael didn't respond. Then, with a heavy sigh, he stepped closer, his voice dropping to a growl. "Because if you die, I die too. That's what the blood oath means. It ties your life to mine. If something happens to you, it doesn't just end me physically. It destroys everything I am." His admission hit her like a punch to the gut. She stared at him, speechless, as the weight of his words sank in. For all his abrasiveness, his protectiveness wasn't just about duty, it was survival. And yet, there was something else buried beneath the surface, something he wasn't saying. Before she could press further, a loud crash shattered the quiet. The door burst open, splintering under the force of Darius' wolves charging inside. Snarls filled the air as three massive creatures lunged toward them, their glowing yellow eyes fixed on Elara. Kael reacted instantly, shoving Elara behind him as he met the first wolf head-on. His claws extended, slicing through fur and flesh with brutal efficiency. But there were too many of them, and his injuries slowed him down. One of the wolves swiped at his side, reopening the wound from earlier. Pain shot through him, but he gritted his teeth, refusing to falter. Elara backed away, her heart racing. Fear clawed at her chest, urging her to flee, but she couldn't, not while Kael was fighting for her. Her hands trembled as she grabbed a nearby lamp, ready to defend herself if necessary. Then it happened. As another wolf leapt toward her, a surge of energy erupted from her body, forming a shimmering barrier that sent the creature flying backward. The room vibrated with the force of it, knocking everyone, including Kael, off balance. Elara gasped, staring at her hands in shock. What had just happened? She could feel the power coursing through her veins, raw and untamed. It terrified her and fascinated her. Kael recovered first, his eyes wide with disbelief as he looked at her. What was that? I don't know, Elara stammered, lowering her trembling hands. I didn't mean to. But there was no time to process. The remaining wolves regrouped, their growls growing louder as they prepared to attack again. Kael moved quickly, grabbing Elara's arm and pulling her toward the back door. "We're getting out of here," he said firmly, his tone leaving no room for argument. Now, outside, the night was alive with movement. Shadows darted between trees, glowing eyes watching their every step. Kael led the way, his senses on high alert as he guided Elara deeper into the woods. Behind them, the sound of pursuit grew closer, relentless and unforgiving. Elara struggled to keep up, her legs burning with exhaustion. Her mind raced, replaying the moment her powers had awakened. Was this what the journals meant? Was she truly connected to the curse and the Forgotten Ones? "Why does it feel like I've done this before?" she asked suddenly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Like I've fought them before." Kael glanced at her, his expression unreadable. "Maybe you have. In another life." "What do you mean?" He hesitated, then shook his head. "It doesn't matter right now. Just focus on staying alive." Elara wanted to argue, but the urgency in his voice silenced her. Instead, she focused on putting one foot in front of the other, trusting Kael to lead them to safety. Finally, they reached a small clearing surrounded by dense trees. It offered minimal cover, but it would have to do for now. Kael pushed Elara gently toward a fallen log, signaling for her to sit. "You're hurt," she said softly, noticing the fresh blood seeping through his shirt. "It's fine," he muttered, brushing off her concern. But his movements betrayed the pain he refused to acknowledge. He leaned against a tree, his breathing labored as he scanned the perimeter. Elara watched him, guilt twisting in her chest. "Why do you keep protecting me, even after everything I've said?" Kael exhaled sharply, running a hand through his dark hair. "Because I don't have a choice. Because if you die, I lose everything. Because," he trailed off, his voice softening, "because I can't let them take you." His words lingered in the air, heavy with meaning. Elara opened her mouth to respond, but before she could speak, her vision blurred. A sudden wave of dizziness overwhelmed her, and she collapsed to her knees, clutching her head. "Elara!" Kael rushed to her side, his hands steadying her shoulders. "What's wrong?" She tried to answer, but the world around her dissolved into chaos. Visions flooded her mind, shadowy figures, glowing symbols, and voices chanting in an ancient language she didn't understand. Her lips moved involuntarily, muttering phrases in the same tongue. Kael stared at her, alarm flashing across his face. Whatever was happening, it wasn't natural. As Elara's muttering grew louder, the ground beneath them began to tremble. The air crackled with energy, and the shadows around them seemed to twist and writhe. taking on forms that resembled wolves, but not quite. Kael pulled Elara closer, shielding her as best he could. But even he couldn't deny the truth. Her powers were awakening faster than either of them could control, and the Forgotten Ones were stirring. The clearing was bathed in the pale light of dawn, mist curling around the base of ancient trees like ghostly tendrils. Kael stood a few paces away from Elara, his arms crossed and his expression unreadable. She sat cross-legged on the damp earth, her hands resting limply in her lap. The events of the previous night still lingered between them. Her cryptic muttering, the trembling ground, the unnatural energy that had surged through her. Neither of them had slept. Exhaustion clung to their movements like a second skin. "You need to learn control," Kael said, finally breaking the silence. His voice was low but firm, carrying an edge of impatience. "Whatever you did last night, it wasn't just random. It's tied to the curse." Elara glanced up at him, her hazel eyes clouded with frustration and fear. "And how exactly am I supposed to do that? You think I can just flip a switch and make it work?" "No," Kael replied sharply, stepping closer. "But sitting here feeling sorry for yourself won't help either. If you want to survive this, you'll listen to me." His tone ignited something inside her, a spark of defiance she hadn't felt since before all this began. She rose to her feet, meeting his gaze head-on. "Survive? That's rich coming from you. For someone who claims he needs me alive, you sure don't act like it." Kael's jaw tightened, his amber eyes flashing with irritation. "I'm not doing this for fun, Elara. Every second we waste is another chance for Darius, or worse, to find us." "Or worse," she echoed bitterly. "You mean the Forgotten Ones? The ones my ancestors locked away because they were too dangerous to exist? How comforting." Kael didn't respond immediately. Instead, he reached out, grabbing her wrist firmly, not enough to hurt, but enough to demand her attention. "Whether you like it or not, your powers are part of this. Learning to use them might be our only shot at stopping whatever's coming." Elara hesitated, torn between anger and the undeniable truth in his words. Finally, she nodded curtly. "Fine. Teach me." Their training began awkwardly, each attempt marked by tension and mistrust. Kael guided her through exercises designed to channel her energy, though his methods were blunt and often frustrating. When she faltered, or worse, lashed out unintentionally, he snapped at her, his patience wearing thinner with every failed effort. "This isn't working," Elara muttered after yet another misstep sent a wave of power rippling outward, knocking over nearby branches. "Maybe I'm not cut out for this." "That's not an option," Kael growled, stepping into her line of sight. "We don't get to quit, Elara. Not if we want to live." She glared at him, tears welling in her eyes. "Why do you even care? Why does any of this matter to you?" Before Kael could answer, a rustling in the bushes drew their attention. Both froze, turning toward the sound as Victor Cross emerged from the shadows. His polished shoes caked with mud, but his suit otherwise immaculate. He adjusted his glasses with a smirk, his gray eyes gleaming with calculated curiosity. "Well, well," Victor drawled, his voice smooth and condescending. "Looks like I've stumbled upon quite the spectacle. What do you want?" Kael snarled, moving instinctively to block Elara from view. Victor raised his hands in mock surrender, though his smile never wavered. "Relax, Wolf. I'm not here to fight. In fact, I'm here to offer a solution." Elara frowned, stepping slightly to the side so she could see him better. "What kind of solution?" "One that doesn't involve trusting him," Victor replied, nodding toward Kael. "Think about it, Miss Hayes. Everything he's told you, every move he's made, it's all been about survival. His survival. Do you really believe he wouldn't sacrifice you if it meant saving himself?" Elara's stomach churned as doubt crept back in. She glanced at Kael, searching for reassurance, but his expression remained stony, unreadable. "He's lying," Kael said flatly, though there was a flicker of unease in his eyes. Don't listen to him. I'm simply offering you a choice, Victor continued, ignoring Kael entirely. Come with me, and I'll protect you. Stay with him. And, well, let's just say history has a way of repeating itself. Elara opened her mouth to respond, but before she could speak, Kael let out a low growl, his claws extending as he took a threatening step forward. Leave. Now. Victor chuckled softly, clearly amused by the display. Very well. But remember, Miss Hayes, the clock is ticking. Choose wisely. With that, he turned and disappeared into the forest, leaving behind an oppressive silence. Later that evening, as twilight settled over the clearing, Kael paced near the edge of the woods, his mind racing. Elara sat nearby, staring into the fire they'd built, her thoughts equally turbulent. The weight of Victor's words hung between them, unspoken but undeniable. Finally, Kael stopped pacing and turned to face her. You know he's wrong, he said quietly, his voice tinged with frustration. Whatever deal he's trying to sell you, it's a trap. And what about your deals? Elara shot back, standing abruptly. Like the one you made with Darius. Kael froze, his eyes widening slightly. What are you talking about? I heard you, she admitted, crossing her arms. Last night, when you thought I was asleep, he offered you a way out. Hand me over and he spares your pack. So tell me, Kael, how close were you to taking it? For a moment, Kael didn't respond. Then, with a heavy sigh, he ran a hand through his dark hair. I considered it, he admitted gruffly, but I didn't agree to anything. I won't. Elara stared at him, her chest tightening with conflicting emotions. Part of her wanted to believe him, but the other part couldn't ignore the lingering doubt. How can I trust you? She whispered, her voice breaking. How can I trust anyone? Kael stepped closer, his expression softening slightly. You don't have to trust me completely. Just give me until tomorrow. One more day to prove I'm not going to betray you. Elara hesitated, tears streaming down her cheeks. She wanted to believe him, to believe there was still hope for them both. But the fear was too much, too overwhelming. Without another word, she turned and fled into the forest, disappearing into the shadows. Kael called after her, panic rising in his chest as he realized she was running straight into danger. Darius' wolves were still out there, watching, waiting. And now, thanks to Victor's meddling, Elara was alone and vulnerable. As Kael sprinted after her, the distant howls of wolves echoed through the trees. They weren't far behind. The forest was alive with shadows, its silence broken only by the rhythmic pounding of Kael's boots against the damp earth. His amber eyes scanned the darkness, every sense on high alert as he followed Elara's trail. Her scent lingered faintly in the air, a mix of lavender and fear, but it grew weaker with each passing moment. Time was slipping away, and the howls echoing through the trees reminded him that Darius' wolves were closing in. Kael's chest tightened with every step. He had failed her once before, letting doubt and mistrust drive a wedge between them. If anything happened to her now, he knew he'd never forgive himself, not just because of the blood oath, but because she mattered, more than he cared to admit. Finally, he reached a clearing where the trees thinned out, revealing the crumbling remains of an ancient structure. Stone pillars jutted from the ground like broken teeth, their surfaces etched with faded carvings. The ruins radiated an eerie energy, as though they held secrets too dangerous to be forgotten. And there she was, Elara, standing at the center of the ruins, her hands trembling as she traced the symbols carved into one of the stones. She looked small, fragile, yet determined, a paradox wrapped in human skin. Elara, Kael called out, his voice low but urgent. We need to leave. Now. She turned sharply, startled by his presence. For a moment, relief flickered across her face, but it was quickly replaced by suspicion. Why should I trust you? She demanded, taking a step back. After everything Victor said. It's not about trust, Kael interrupted, stepping closer. It's about survival. Those wolves are still out there and are hunting us. Elara hesitated, glancing over her shoulder at the carvings behind her. Something about them drew her in, whispering promises of answers she couldn't ignore. "What is this place?" she asked softly, her fingers brushing the stone again. Kael followed her gaze, his expression darkening. "It's part of the curse. These ruins, they're tied to the prophecy. To us." Her breath hitched as realization dawned. Us. Before he could respond, she pressed her hand fully against the carving. A surge of energy rippled outward, sending both of them stumbling backward. Visions flooded her mind. Images of wolves and humans bound together, fighting side by side against shadowy figures that seemed to consume everything in their path. Then came the Forgotten Ones, their glowing red eyes piercing through the darkness as they broke free from their prison. Elara gasped, clutching her head as the vision faded. "They're coming!" she whispered, her voice trembling. "The Forgotten Ones, they're breaking free." Kael grabbed her arm, pulling her upright. "We don't have time for this. We need to go." But before they could move, the sound of snarling erupted around them. Darius' pack emerged from the shadows, surrounding the ruins with bared teeth and glowing yellow eyes. At their center stood Darius himself, his icy blue gaze fixed on Elara. "Well, well," Darius drawled, his lips curling into a cruel smile. "Looks like we've found our little runaway." Kael stepped in front of Elara, his claws extending as he growled low in his throat. "Stay back," he warned, his voice dripping with menace. Darius chuckled, raising his hands in mock surrender. "Relax, Wolf. I'm not here for a fight yet. I just want what's mine." "She's not yours," Kael snapped, his muscles coiled like a spring ready to strike. Elara's heart raced as she glanced between them, panic clawing at her chest. She knew they were outnumbered, trapped in the ruins with no clear escape. But then she felt it, the same energy that had surged through her earlier, crackling beneath her skin. It was raw, untamed, but undeniable. Taking a deep breath, she stepped forward, surprising even herself. "Leave us alone," she said firmly, her voice steadier than she expected, "or I'll make you regret it." Kael shot her a warning glance, silently pleading with her not to provoke them. But Elara ignored him, focusing instead on the power coursing through her veins. With a sharp motion, she thrust her hands outward, releasing a wave of energy that sent several wolves flying backward. Darius' smirk faltered, replaced by a flicker of genuine surprise. "Impressive," he muttered, narrowing his eyes. "But not enough." The remaining wolves lunged, forcing Kael and Elara to fight side by side. Their movements were chaotic, but effective, blending instinct and desperation as they fended off attackers. Finally, seizing a brief opening, Kael grabbed Elara's hand and pulled her toward the edge of the ruins. "Run!" he shouted, leading her into the forest. Behind them, Darius' voice carried on the wind. "This isn't over." Back at the cabin, exhaustion settled over them like a heavy blanket. Elara collapsed onto the couch, her hand shaking as she tried to steady her breathing. Kael leaned against the wall nearby, his body tense despite the reprieve. Neither spoke for several minutes, the weight of what had happened hanging between them. Finally, Kael broke the silence. "You shouldn't have done that back there," he said gruffly, though there was no anger in his tone. "Only concern, and let you handle everything alone." Elara shot back, meeting his gaze. "I'm not some helpless bystander, Kael. Whether you like it or not, I'm part of this." Kael sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I know, but your powers, they're dangerous. If you lose control—" "I won't," she interrupted, her voice softening. "Not while you're here." Her words caught him off guard, stirring something deep within him. For a moment, vulnerability flickered in his amber eyes, unguarded and raw. "Elara," he began, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm scared of losing control around you. Of hurting you." She stared at him, stunned by the admission. Slowly, she stood and crossed the room, stopping just inches away. "Then don't," she said simply, placing a hand on his arm. "We're stronger together, Kael. You just have to trust me." He hesitated, then nodded, his expression softening slightly. "Okay." As night fell, Elara drifted into an uneasy sleep, her dreams haunted by whispers she couldn't escape. The voices were ancient, seductive, urging her to embrace her destiny, to unlock the full potential of her powers. "You hold the key," they murmured, their words echoing in her mind. "Set us free." Elara woke with a start, her heart pounding as the whispers lingered, refusing to fade. She glanced toward Kael, who slept fitfully nearby, unaware of the storm brewing inside her. In the darkness, Elara rose quietly, drawn inexplicably toward the forest. The voices called to her, promising answers and power. As she stepped outside, the moonlight cast long shadows across the ground, guiding her deeper into the unknown. Would she listen, or would she resist? The forest was eerily silent, save for the occasional rustle of leaves stirred by a restless breeze. Inside the cabin, tension crackled like static electricity, thick enough to choke on. Kael paced near the window, his amber eyes scanning the darkness beyond the glass. Every instinct screamed that something was wrong. Too quiet, too calm, but he couldn't pinpoint why. Elara sat at the table, flipping through one of the journals she'd salvaged from the ruins. Her brow furrowed as she deciphered faded ink and cryptic symbols, searching for answers they desperately needed. The voices from her dreams still lingered in her mind, whispering promises she couldn't ignore. But she shoved them aside, focusing instead on the task at hand. "We're running out of time," Kael muttered suddenly, breaking the silence. His voice was low but laced with frustration, his hands clenching and unclenching at his sides. "Every moment we stay here puts us and my pack at risk." Elara glanced up, her hazel eyes meeting his. "And where exactly are we supposed to go? You've been leading Darius in circles for days. Sooner or later, he'll catch up." Kael didn't respond immediately. Instead, he turned back to the window, his jaw tightening. She was right, of course. They were trapped between enemies closing in and allies growing restless. Loyalty within the Shadow Pack had always been fragile, held together by fear and respect rather than trust. And now his attachment to Elara, a human, was testing those bonds to their limits. Later that evening, Kael ventured into the woods to meet with a few members of his pack who had remained loyal, or so he hoped. The clearing was dimly lit by moonlight, casting long shadows across the faces of those gathered. Their expressions ranged from wary to outright hostile, and Kael felt the weight of their judgment pressing down on him. "You've changed, Kael," one of them said finally, stepping forward. It was Rin, a burly werewolf with scars crisscrossing his arms. His tone wasn't accusatory, but it wasn't supportive either. "You're letting this human cloud your judgment. What happens when she gets one of us killed?" "She's not the enemy," Kael growled, his voice sharp enough to cut steel. "Darius is. If you can't see that—" "Maybe we do," another voice interrupted. This one belonged to Cade, a younger wolf whose loyalty had always been questionable. He smirked faintly, his gaze flickering toward the trees. "But maybe you're forgetting what it means to lead. We follow strength, not weakness." Before Kael could respond, movement in the shadows caught his attention. A figure emerged, Darius Scout, bloody and battered, dragging himself forward with obvious effort. In his hand, he clutched a scrap of fabric unmistakably torn from Elara's coat. Kael's blood ran cold. "Who told you where to find her?" he demanded, his voice dangerously low. The scout grinned weakly, coughing up blood. "One of your own," he rasped before collapsing dead. Rin exchanged uneasy glances with the others, but no one spoke. The implication hung heavy in the air: betrayal. Someone in the pack had sold them out. Back at the cabin, Elara sifted through documents she'd taken from Victor Cross during their last encounter. Among them was a letter addressed to Darius, detailing plans to use her against Kael. Her stomach churned as she pieced together the truth. Victor wasn't just hunting werewolves. He was collaborating with Darius, manipulating both sides to achieve his own goals. "Kael!" she called out, clutching the letter as he returned, his expression stormy. "We have a problem." He strode over, taking the paper from her hands. As he read, his features hardened, anger simmering beneath the surface. "This changes nothing," he said finally, though his voice betrayed the turmoil inside him. "They'll come for us regardless." Elara shook her head, stepping closer. "No, it changes everything. We're being played, Kael. Both of us. Darius and Victor. They're using us to destroy each other." For a moment, neither spoke. Then, slowly, Kael reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her face. His touch was gentle, hesitant, as if afraid he might break her. "I'm sorry," he murmured, his voice barely audible, "for dragging you into this." Elara's breath hitched, her heart pounding as she met his gaze. "You didn't drag me. I chose to stay." His expression softened, vulnerability flickering in his amber eyes. "Why?" "Because," she hesitated, searching for words that wouldn't betray how deeply she cared about him. "Because I believe in us. Together, we can stop this." Kael's hand dropped to his side, his expression shuddering once more. "Don't say things like that," he said sharply, turning away. "You don't know what you're saying. What I am, what I could become, it's not safe for you." Elara opened her mouth to argue, but before she could speak, a loud crash shattered the quiet. The door burst open, splintering under the force of Darius' wolves charging inside. Chaos erupted instantly. Snarls filled the air as 3 massive wolves lunged toward them, their glowing yellow eyes fixed on Elara. Kael reacted without hesitation, shoving her behind him as he met the first attacker head-on. Claws clashed, tearing through flesh and fur with brutal efficiency. Elara scrambled backward, her mind racing. She couldn't fight, not like this, but she couldn't run either. Not while Kael was holding them off. Summoning every ounce of courage, she focused on the energy coursing through her veins, channeling it outward in a desperate attempt to create a barrier. The shimmering shield flared to life, sending 2 of the wolves flying backward. But the third broke through, grabbing her by the arm and yanking her toward the door. Pain shot through her as its teeth sank into her skin, and she cried out, struggling to break free. Kael turned, his eyes widening with panic as he saw her being dragged away. "Elara!" He lunged after her, but more wolves poured in, blocking his path. For a moment, their gazes locked across the room, his filled with desperation, hers with terror. Then she was gone, pulled into the night by Darius' forces. As Kael fought his way through the chaos, rage consumed him, driving him to push harder, faster. But deep down he knew it was too late. Darius had her now, and whatever horrors awaited her, Kael feared they would be worse than death. The air inside Darius' den was thick with tension, the kind that presses against your chest and makes every breath feel like a struggle. Elara sat bound to a chair in the center of the room, her arms tied behind her back and her legs secured to the legs of the chair. Blood trickled down her forearm from where the wolf had bitten her, but she refused to let the pain show on her face. Around her, shadows shifted as Darius' pack prowled restlessly, their glowing yellow eyes fixed on her like predators circling prey. Darius himself stood near the fire, his icy blue gaze piercing through the dim light as he studied her. His lips curled into a cruel smile, though there was something calculating beneath it, something that unnerved her more than his snarls ever could. "So," he began, his voice smooth and deliberate, "you're the reason Kael's been acting so uncharacteristically soft." Elara met his gaze without flinching, her jaw tightening. "I'm not afraid of you." Darius chuckled softly, stepping closer until he loomed over her. "You should be," he said, his tone dropping to a dangerous whisper. "But I'll admit you've got spirit. Too bad it won't save you." He reached out, grabbing her chin roughly and tilting her head up. "Tell me what you know about the curse. About the Forgotten Ones." Elara's stomach churned at the mention of the ancient spirits, but she forced herself to remain calm. "I don't know anything," she lied, her voice steady despite the fear clawing at her chest. Darius' grip tightened, his patience wearing thin. Wrong answer. Before she could react, a surge of energy erupted from her body, forming a protective barrier that sent him stumbling backward. The room vibrated with the force of it, knocking several wolves off balance. Gasps echoed around the den as everyone, including Darius, stared at her in stunned silence. For a moment, Elara herself was shocked by what she'd done, but then determination hardened her expression. If they wanted a fight, she'd give them one. Kael moved swiftly through the forest, his amber eyes blazing with fury and desperation. Behind him, the remnants of his pack followed reluctantly, their loyalty wavering but still intact for now. He didn't care about their doubts or fears. All that mattered was getting to Elara before it was too late. "She's our only chance," Kael growled, glancing over his shoulder at Rin and the others. "If we lose her, we lose everything." Rin exchanged uneasy glances with the group, but nodded grudgingly. "Then let's get her back." They approached Darius' den cautiously, using the cover of darkness to mask their movements. The scent of blood and fear filled the air, fueling Kael's rage. He clenched his fists, claws extending as he prepared for battle. When they finally reached the edge of the clearing, Kael signaled for the others to hold back while he scouted ahead. Peering through the trees, he saw Elara surrounded by wolves, her powers flaring wildly as she resisted Darius' interrogation. Pride flickered in his chest, quickly overshadowed by panic. She was strong, but she couldn't hold out forever. "Ready," he whispered, turning to his pack. They nodded grimly, weapons drawn and fangs bared. With a roar, Kael charged into the fray, tearing through the first wave of wolves with brutal efficiency. Chaos erupted as the Shadow Pack joined the fight, their combined strength overwhelming Darius' forces. For a brief moment, hope surged within Kael. They might actually pull this off. Inside the den, Elara heard the commotion outside and knew Kael had come for her. Relief flooded her chest, but it was short-lived. As another wolf lunged toward her, she summoned her power once more, creating a shimmering barrier that sent the creature flying backward. Her energy reserves were dwindling, her body trembling with exhaustion. But she refused to give up, not when Kael was risking everything to save her. Finally, Kael burst into the room, his amber eyes locking onto hers. "Elara!" he shouted, rushing toward her. Before he could reach her, Darius intercepted him, slamming him into the ground with brutal force. Blood sprayed from Kael's mouth as he struggled to rise, his injuries slowing him down. Elara's heart pounded as she watched him stagger to his feet, barely able to stand. "Stay down, Kael," Darius sneered, raising a dagger coated in silver. "You've lost." "No." Elara screamed, breaking free of her restraints with sheer willpower. Summoning every ounce of strength left in her body, she unleashed a massive wave of energy that knocked Darius backward, giving Kael enough time to recover. Kael turned to her, his expression softening briefly despite the chaos around them. "You shouldn't have done that," he rasped, his voice strained. "I'm not letting you die for me," she shot back, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Not again." Their gazes locked, unspoken words passing between them. In that moment, Elara realized she couldn't deny her feelings any longer. She loved him. And if they made it out of this alive, she wouldn't waste another second pretending otherwise. Together, they fought their way out of the den, taking down wolves and dodging attacks with desperate coordination. Just as they reached the edge of the clearing, However, the ground beneath them began to tremble violently. Shadows twisted and writhed, coalescing into humanoid forms with glowing red eyes. "The Forgotten Ones," Elara whispered, her voice trembling with dread. Kael grabbed her hand, pulling her close. "We need to run. Now." But the spirits advanced, their presence suffocating as they blocked their path. One of them extended a clawed hand, its voice echoing in their minds. "You cannot escape destiny." As the Forgotten Ones closed in, Kael and Elara stood back to back, ready to fight even as exhaustion threatened to overwhelm them. The odds were impossible, the danger insurmountable, but neither was willing to give up without a fight. Would their bond be enough to withstand the wrath of ancient beings bent on destruction? Or would they become the final sacrifice needed to seal or unleash the Forgotten Ones? The forest was alive with the sound of their ragged breathing as Kael and Elara stumbled through the underbrush, the Forgotten Ones' whispers still echoing in their minds. Every step felt heavier than the last, exhaustion weighing them down like chains. Yet they couldn't stop, not while Darius wolves prowled somewhere behind them, closing in. Kael's amber eyes darted constantly between the trees, scanning for any sign of pursuit. His injuries from the rescue mission were severe. Blood seeped through makeshift bandages, staining his shirt, but he refused to slow down. Not until Elara was safe. Elara trudged beside him, her body trembling with fatigue. The surge of power she'd unleashed earlier had drained her completely, leaving her weak and disoriented. Still, she forced herself to keep moving, clutching the journals she'd salvaged during their escape. Something about them tugged at her, a nagging feeling that answers lay within their brittle pages. Finally, they reached a small cave hidden behind a curtain of vines. It wasn't much, but it would shield them temporarily. Kael ushered her inside before collapsing against the rocky wall, his chest heaving. "We can't stay here long," he muttered, his voice hoarse. "Darius will find us." Elara nodded absently, already flipping open one of the journals. Her hands trembled as she scanned the faded ink, searching for anything that might explain what was happening, or how to stop it. Underscore, 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 underscore. Hours passed in tense silence, broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves outside or the flicker of firelight from the small blaze they'd built. Elara finally found what she'd been looking for, a passage detailing the ritual required to break the curse. Her stomach churned as she read the words aloud. To sever the bond and seal away the Forgotten Ones, a life must be given willingly, a sacrifice irreplaceable, tied by blood and fate. Kael froze, his gaze snapping toward her. "What does that mean?" "It means," Elara hesitated, her voice barely above a whisper. "It means someone has to die. Someone important to both sides." Realization dawned on Kael's face, followed swiftly by fury. "No," he growled, shaking his head. "Not you. Never you." Elara's heart ached at the raw emotion in his voice, but she couldn't deny the truth. "It has to be me, Kael. My bloodline is connected to the curse. I'm the only one who can do this." "You don't know that." Kael snapped, stepping closer. His hands gripped her shoulders tightly, not enough to hurt, but enough to demand her full attention. "There's another way. There has to be." "There isn't," she replied softly, tears welling in her eyes. "And even if there was, we don't have time to find it. The Forgotten Ones are breaking free. If I don't act now, everyone will suffer." Kael stared at her, his expression torn between anger and despair. For a moment, neither spoke. Then, with a heavy sigh, he pulled her into his arms, holding her close despite the tension between them. "I won't let you go," he murmured, his voice rough with emotion. "I can't." Elara buried her face in his chest, fighting back tears. She wanted to believe him, to trust that they could find another solution. But deep down she knew the truth. This was her destiny, her burden to bear, and no matter how much it hurt, she wouldn't back down. Their uneasy truce shattered when the sound of approaching footsteps echoed through the cave. Kael shoved Elara behind him, his claws extending as he prepared to fight. Moments later, Darius appeared at the entrance, flanked by several wolves. His icy blue eyes gleamed with triumph as he stepped forward. "Well, well," he drawled, smirking. "Look who decided to play hero again." Kael growled low in his throat, his stance defensive. "Stay back, Darius. You've pushed too far already." "Oh, I haven't even started," Darius replied, raising a hand. From the shadows emerged Victor Cross, his polished suit caked with dirt, but otherwise immaculate. He adjusted his glasses with a smirk, his gray eyes glinting with malice. "Miss Hayes," Victor said smoothly, ignoring Kael entirely. "You've been quite the enigma. Your bloodline holds the key to everything, and soon it'll belong to me." Elara's stomach churned as realization dawned. "You want to free the Forgotten Ones," she accused, her voice shaking with rage. "That's your plan all along." Victor chuckled softly, clearly amused by her outrage. "Very perceptive. With your powers and your blood, I'll unlock their full potential. Together, we'll reshape this world." Before anyone could react, Victor raised a strange device, a metallic orb pulsing with unnatural energy, and activated it. A blinding light filled the cave, accompanied by an ear-splitting hum that made Elara's head spin. Pain shot through her body as the device resonated with her powers, pulling at something deep within her. Kael lunged forward, tackling Victor to the ground, but the damage was done. The Forgotten One's presence grew stronger, their whispers louder and more insistent. Shadows writhed across the walls, taking on forms that resembled wolves, but not quite. "We need to leave. Now," Kael shouted, grabbing Elara's arm and dragging her toward the exit. Darius laughed cruelly as they fled, his voice carrying after them. "Run all you want, Kael. You can't outrun destiny." Back in the forest, Elara leaned heavily against a tree, her vision blurred and her body trembling. The ritual weighed heavily on her mind, gnawing at her resolve. She glanced at Kael, who stood nearby, scanning the darkness with wary eyes. He cared about her, that much was clear, but caring wouldn't save them. Sacrifice would. As Kael turned momentarily to check their surroundings, Elara slipped the journal into her pocket, her decision firm. She wouldn't tell him, not yet. Not until it was too late to stop her. Under the cover of night, Elara whispered a silent apology, her fingers brushing the edge of the journal. Tomorrow, she would make the ultimate choice, the one that would either save them all or doom them forever. Would Kael realize her plan in time? Or would her sacrifice tear them apart? The ruins loomed ahead, ancient and foreboding under the pale light of dawn. Mist clung to the ground like a shroud, curling around the crumbling stone pillars etched with faded carvings. Kael and Elara moved cautiously through the clearing, their footsteps muffled by damp leaves and moss. The air was thick with an oppressive energy, as though the earth itself bristled in anticipation of what was to come. Elara tightened her grip on the journal, tucked securely in her pocket, its weight a constant reminder of the choice she'd made. Her heart pounded erratically, not from fear, but from resolve. She glanced at Kael, who walked beside her with his usual predatory grace, though his injuries slowed him slightly. His amber eyes scanned the shadows, sharp and unyielding, betraying none of the turmoil within. "We're doing this," Elara said softly, more to herself than to him. "For everyone." Kael turned toward her, his expression unreadable. For a moment he simply stared, searching her face for something. Regret, hesitation, anything that might give him hope she'd changed her mind. But all he found was determination. "Not yet," he growled, his voice low but fierce. "We fight first. Sacrifices later." Before she could respond, movement rippled through the trees. Figures emerged from the shadows, their glowing yellow eyes piercing through the mist. Darius led them, flanked by Victor Cross, whose polished suit seemed absurdly out of place amidst the chaos. Behind them stood a dozen wolves, their snarls echoing ominously through the ruins. "Well, well," Darius drawled, his icy blue gaze fixed on Elara. "Looks like you've decided to play hero after all." Kael stepped instinctively in front of her, his claws extending as he growled low in his throat. "Stay away from her." Darius smirked, raising a hand lazily. "Or what? You'll kill me again?" "Oh wait, you already tried that." Victor adjusted his glasses, stepping forward with calculated calmness. "Enough games," he said smoothly, his gray eyes gleaming with malice. "Miss Hayes, it's time to fulfill your destiny." Elara clenched her fists, forcing herself to remain steady despite the fear clawing at her chest. "I won't let you win." Victor chuckled darkly, gesturing toward the center of the ruins where an altar had been erected, a crude circle carved into the stone, surrounded by runes that pulsed faintly with unnatural energy. "You don't have a choice." Chaos erupted instantly as Darius' wolves lunged forward, surrounding Kael and Elara. Kael fought with brutal efficiency, tearing through attackers with feral precision. Blood sprayed across the ground as claws clashed and bodies collided, the sounds of battle drowning out everything else. Elara scrambled back, clutching the journal tightly as Victor approached her, his metallic orb glowing brighter with each step. Pain shot through her body as the device resonated with her powers, pulling at something deep inside her. Shadows writhed around them, taking shape as the Forgotten Ones began manifesting fully. "You can't stop this," Victor sneered, raising the orb above the altar. "Your blood will free them." "No," Elara shouted, summoning every ounce of strength left in her body. A surge of energy erupted from her hands, creating a shimmering barrier that knocked Victor backward, sending the orb skittering across the ground. He stumbled, momentarily stunned, giving her precious seconds to act. Kael, meanwhile, faced off against Darius in a brutal showdown. The two alphas clashed with ferocious intensity, their movements a blur of claws and teeth. Blood stained the ground beneath them as they exchanged blows, neither willing to yield. "You should have stayed down," Darius snarled, slashing at Kael's side and reopening old wounds. Kael gritted his teeth, refusing to falter. "This ends now." With a roar, he lunged forward, driving his claws into Darius' chest. The rival alpha staggered backward, collapsing onto the ground with a final, guttural gasp. Dead. But there was no time to celebrate. As Kael turned, his gaze locked onto Elara and the growing darkness consuming the ruins. Elara reached for the journal, flipping frantically through its pages as the Forgotten Ones' whispers grew louder, more insistent. Their forms solidified, towering over the battlefield like living nightmares, their glowing red eyes filled with malevolent intent. "Elara!" Kael shouted, rushing toward her. "What are you doing?" She didn't answer, her focus entirely on the ritual described in the journal. If she acted quickly enough, she could seal them away, but only if she completed the incantation before the spirits broke free completely. Victor regained his footing, lunging for the orb once more. Before he could reach it, however, Kael tackled him to the ground, pinning him down with relentless force. "It's over," Kael growled, his voice dripping with menace. Victor laughed maniacally, even as Kael pressed his claws against the hunter's throat. "Too late," he rasped, nodding toward the Forgotten Ones. "They're already here." Underscore, 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 underscore. As Elara chanted the final words of the ritual, the ground trembled violently beneath them. Shadows twisted and coiled, breaking free of their ethereal bonds. The Forgotten Ones surged forward, their presence suffocating as they unleashed wave after wave of destruction. Kael leapt to Elara's side, shielding her with his body as debris rained down around them. "Elara!" he shouted, panic rising in his chest. "Finish it!" "I'm trying," she screamed, tears streaming down her cheeks. Her voice cracked as she continued the incantation, her energy reserves dwindling with each passing second. The Forgotten Ones closed in, their glowing red eyes locking onto her. One of them extended a clawed hand, brushing against her shoulder. Pain shot through her body, white-hot and searing, but she refused to stop. As the ritual neared completion, the Forgotten Ones roared in defiance, unleashing a massive surge of power that threatened to obliterate everything in their path. Kael grabbed Elara, pulling her close as the world around them dissolved into chaos. Could they finish the ritual in time, or would the Forgotten Ones consume them all? The ruins were a maelstrom of chaos, the air thick with the stench of sulfur and ash. The Forgotten Ones loomed larger than ever, their shadowy forms crackling with malevolent energy as they surged forward, intent on destruction. Elara stood at the center of it all, her voice trembling but resolute as she chanted the final words of the ritual. Each syllable felt like fire tearing through her throat, yet she pressed on, driven by sheer willpower. Kael fought to shield her, his body battered and bloodied, but unwavering. Claws extended, he slashed at any spirit that dared approach, growling with primal ferocity. His amber eyes burned brighter than ever, flickering with desperation as he glanced back at Elara. She was fading, her strength ebbing away, but there was no stopping now. They were too close. Elara's hands trembled as she completed the incantation, slamming her palms onto the rune-covered altar. A blinding light erupted from the stone, pulsing outward in waves of pure energy. The Forgotten One screamed, a sound so piercing it shook the very foundations of the earth, as their forms began to dissolve. Shadows writhed and twisted, clawing vainly at the barrier sealing them away once more. But the effort was too much for Elara. Her legs buckled beneath her, and she collapsed to her knees, gasping for breath. The journal slipped from her fingers, its pages fluttering uselessly in the wind. "Elara!" Kael shouted, rushing to her side. He caught her before she hit the ground, cradling her against his chest. Her skin was pale, her breathing shallow, but her hazel eyes met his with quiet determination. "It's done," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the fading echoes of the spirit's wails. "They're gone." Kael's jaw tightened, tears welling in his eyes for the first time in decades. "You idiot," he murmured, brushing hair from her face. "Why didn't you let me?" "I couldn't lose you," she interrupted softly, placing a weak hand on his cheek. "Not after everything we've been through." For a moment neither spoke. Then, slowly, Kael leaned down, pressing his forehead against hers. His voice was raw with emotion when he finally spoke. "I love you, Elara, and I swear I'll never let anything happen to you again." Her lips curved into a faint smile despite her exhaustion. "Good, because I'm not going anywhere." Victor Cross lay sprawled on the ground nearby, unconscious but alive. Around him, remnants of Darius' pack scattered into the forest, abandoning their fallen leader. Kael turned his attention briefly to Darius, who groaned feebly as he struggled to rise. Blood soaked his shirt, but he was still breathing. Kael approached him, claws extended, ready to end this once and for all. But as he looked down at the broken Alpha, something shifted inside him. Hatred and vengeance had defined him for so long, but not anymore. Not since Elara. Instead of striking, Kael grabbed Darius by the collar, hauling him upright. "Leave," he growled, his voice low and dangerous. "And if I ever see you again, I won't be so merciful."